Hi, I'm Sophia, and if you're anything like me, you've probably experienced the feeling of falling in love for the very first time, when everything feels perfect, and your heart beats a little faster just thinking about that person. I used to think that first love was something out of a fairy tale, something magical and unbreakable. But little did I know, the first person to hold my heart would also be the one to shatter it. I was 17 when I met Ethan. We were both seniors in high school, both at that age where everything feels intense and real. It was a random encounter at the school library. He had that easy smile and the kind of charm that made everyone around him feel special. Our first conversation was about a book I was reading. I don't even remember what it was, but I remember the way he listened so intently, like he cared about what I was saying. I felt seen, really seen, for the first time. He wasn't like any guy I had ever known. Ethan was warm, thoughtful, and so incredibly genuine. He made me feel like I was the only person in the room. For the first time, I felt like love was real, like the kind of love you read about in books and dream about at night. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about love was about to be turned upside down. From the moment Ethan and I started talking, everything just seemed to click. It wasn't like the kind of love stories you see in movies, where everything happens in a flash. Ours was slow, like a beautiful, unfolding journey. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams, hopes, and even our deepest fears. We would walk through the school halls hand in hand, as if nothing else mattered. His presence felt comforting, like a safe place I never wanted to leave. One afternoon, he asked me to go to a small cafe after school. It was our first official date. We both ordered the same coffee, and even though the cafe was crowded, it felt like we were the only ones there. I could feel the chemistry between us, the way our fingers brushed when we reached for the sugar, the way he smiled every time I laughed. I couldn't help but feel like I was in a dream, one where everything was perfect. Ethan had this way of making me believe in love like I never had before. We started planning the future. Silly things, like our first road trip together and what we would name our future dog. We even joked about growing old together, sitting on a porch, sharing stories from our youth. I believed every word. I genuinely thought we were meant to be, two souls perfectly in sync, destined to share everything that life threw our way. In the weeks that followed, things just kept getting better. We spent nearly every day together, lunches in the school courtyard, walks after class, and late-night phone calls. He was everything I ever wanted and more. With Ethan, I felt like I had found someone who truly understood me. I was no longer just Sophia the girl at school. I was Sophia, his girl, his everything. And for the first time, I thought I had everything I needed to be happy. As the weeks passed, something began to shift, though I didn't want to admit it at first. Ethan wasn't the same. At first, it was small things, subtle changes I could easily brush off. He would cancel plans at the last minute, always claiming he had a lot of homework or that something had come up with friends. I told myself it was normal. After all, we were both busy, and life sometimes got in the way. But deep down, I felt the distance growing. I noticed that when we were together, Ethan seemed distracted. His eyes wandered as I spoke, and his smiles didn't reach his eyes the way they used to. It was like he wasn't fully there, like I was talking to a version of him that didn't exist anymore. And when I'd ask if something was wrong, he'd always brush it off with a half-hearted joke or a quick change of subject. "Everything's fine," he would say, but it never felt like it. I began to wonder if it was me. Maybe I was too clingy, too needy, or maybe I wasn't giving him enough space. I tried to change, tried to be the girlfriend who was understanding, the one who didn't push him for answers. But every time we met, I felt more and more like I was losing him. It hurt, but I convinced myself that it would pass, that things would get better. After all, no relationship was perfect, right? One afternoon, we were supposed to meet after school, but he texted me at the last minute saying he was too tired to hang out. I was disappointed, but I said okay. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I waited for him to reach out, but he didn't. I spent the evening thinking about all the small changes, the missed calls, the forgotten promises. and for the first time I wondered if this was the beginning of the end. I never imagined it would end this way. Ethan had always been my world, and when I finally discovered what was really happening, it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. It all started the day Clara, my best friend, pulled me aside after school. She looked uneasy, like she didn't know how to tell me something important. I could tell right away that something was wrong. "Sophia, I think you need to know something," Clara said, her voice soft and hesitant. "I overheard Ethan talking with someone. A girl. Amelia." She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. They were talking like they'd been seeing each other for weeks now. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook, and my heart raced in my chest as I tried to process what Clara was saying. Ethan, the boy who had promised me forever, was seeing someone else? It didn't make sense. But Clara's words felt too real to ignore. I couldn't breathe, but I had to confront him. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. That evening, I waited until Ethan texted me, and when he did, I didn't waste a second. I called him, my voice trembling as I tried to keep my composure. "Ethan, is there something you're not telling me?" I asked. "About Amelia?" There was a long silence on the other end before he sighed heavily. "Sophia, I didn't want to hurt you," he finally admitted, his voice distant. "But yes, I've been seeing her. I'm sorry, but I just don't feel the same way about you anymore." The words hit me like a slap to the face. It didn't feel real. My hands were clammy, my heart shattered as he continued talking, explaining how he had met someone new and that they had been growing closer over the past few weeks. I felt a cold, empty space grow inside me as he spoke, each word piercing through me. It was like he didn't even care about what we'd shared. He told me he never intended to hurt me, but the truth was, he already had. "I hope you can understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But how could I understand? How could I understand that the boy I thought I would spend my life with was now a stranger to me? The days after Ethan's confession were nothing short of torturous. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Every little thing reminded me of him, the way he would laugh, the way his eyes would light up when we talked about our future. All of that felt like a cruel joke now. How could someone who claimed to love me so much just leave? How could Ethan be so cold? I spent the next few days in a haze of emotions, grief, anger, and confusion all blending together. I cried more than I thought was possible. I couldn't understand how I hadn't seen the signs earlier. How had I missed the cracks in our relationship when they were staring me right in the face? I felt foolish, like I'd been living in a fantasy that was never real. Ethan had shattered that fantasy, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. But, as much as it hurt, Clara was there for me. She was the one who reminded me that I was strong, that I could heal, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. She'd sit with me late into the night, letting me vent and cry until I could no longer find the words. She was the one who dragged me out of bed, even when I didn't want to move. "You're not the first person to go through this, Sophia," she'd say, "and you won't be the last. But you will get through it." It wasn't easy. It felt like Ethan had taken a part of me with him, and I wasn't sure how to fill that hole. But over time, I started to realize that maybe this was an opportunity for me to rediscover who I was outside of him. I didn't need to be defined by the boy who had broken my heart. I was Sophia, not Ethan's girlfriend, and it was time I remembered that. One afternoon, I finally decided to call Ethan. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I needed to find closure. I needed him to understand how much he had hurt me. He picked up the phone, and the awkward silence on the other end felt suffocating. I told him how betrayed I felt, how he had crushed me. I told him that even though I was hurt, I still wished him the best. And then I ended the call, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't the closure I'd hoped for, but it was enough. I knew it was time to let go. In the weeks that followed, something inside me began to change. Slowly, I started to rebuild myself. The pain of Ethan's betrayal was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind, but it was no longer all-consuming. I realized that I had been letting him define me, letting my whole sense of worth be tied to a relationship that was never meant to last. And while I couldn't erase the past, I could control what came next. I threw myself into my passions, things I had put on the back burner for months because I had been so consumed by the relationship. I started writing again, something that had always brought me peace. Words became my escape, my way of processing everything I had been through. The stories I wrote were raw, full of emotions that I couldn't express any other way. I found solace in those pages, in the characters I created who were stronger than I was, who could overcome whatever obstacles came their way. Clara stayed by my side, as always. She encouraged me to focus on myself, to embrace the person I was before Ethan came into my life. She reminded me that I had so much more to offer than just being someone's girlfriend. I started reconnecting with old friends, those I had lost touch with while wrapped up in my relationship. I realized how much I had neglected my own life in favor of Ethan's. Now, I was finally rediscovering who I was, independent of anyone else's expectations. And then, one day, something changed. It wasn't a sudden shift, but I started to feel lighter. I had stopped crying every night, stopped obsessing over Ethan's every move. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I wasn't waiting for him to come back, to apologize, or to fix things. I understood now that the only person who could fix my heart was me. I had to be my own hero, to heal and move forward on my own terms. I started doing things just for me. I went for long walks in the park, listened to music I loved, and allowed myself to be vulnerable. I met new people, and while none of them could replace what I had with Ethan, I realized I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was whole on my own. I began to see that my worth wasn't dependent on the love of a boy, but on the love I gave myself. And that, I realized, was enough. And just like that, life gave me the chance to reject him. Yes, as you hear it, he came back to me. And I looked him in the eyes, and said no. I don't need someone like you in my life. And my dear friends, that was how the story of my first love ended.